First off, I wanted to welcome everyone tonight to our final open house for the Highway 23 safety assessment. And the purpose of this open house is to essentially wrap up the work that we've been working on here since January. And the format of tonight's open house is to go through this presentation, and then we can break out into groups to talk about these boards a little bit more in depth, as well as interact with the partners here that can help answer questions. So you can look for those of us with name tags if you have any questions about what's being presented tonight. We do ask that all of you hold your questions until the end when we break out into a smaller group. We are streaming this online for some online viewers, and so questions interrupting the presentation can be a little bit problematic for those folks. So as many of you know, we've implemented a comprehensive public engagement process throughout this assessment, and we've received great feedback through this process. But before we get started, we wanted to acknowledge a few folks that helped us through this process. First and foremost, Paula Nemes with the library here, helping us facilitate these meetings and getting everything set up. Secondly is Tina Quinones with the Marshall Public Schools and the Minority Advocate Program. Next is Alex Peterson with the City of Marshall. And then also several focus groups that we've held throughout that included some people from the freight industry, local businesses, law enforcement, education, which included both SMSU as well as Marshall High Schools, pedestrian and bicycle advocates, as well as the minority populations. And then lastly, all of the assessment partners that were part of this, including the Marshall Chamber of Commerce, Transportation Group, Lyon County, the City of Marshall, and the DOT. So as far as what we're trying to accomplish tonight, we want to recap what the goals were for our assessment here when we got started. We also want to recap what we've learned through this process, through the public involvement process. And then also we'll present our priorities that we have generated based on all this information. And then we'll just quickly walk through the strategies and improvements that were considered, as well as what is currently recommended. And then we'll also talk about how this is going to change here in the future and what you can expect moving forward. So what were the goals of the safety assessment? The first goal was to essentially improve the safety of the Highway 23 corridor, first and foremost. Secondly, we understand that the function of Highway 23 has changed over time, and our goal is to essentially accommodate that change, but also knowing that more change is coming. So more businesses and houses are going to be on the east side of Highway 23. We want to make sure that we account for those folks. Our third goal is to essentially improve accessibility for all users, not just cars and trucks and vehicles, but also pedestrians, bicycles, and transit users. And then lastly, our fourth goal was to prioritize these improvements to help develop a long-range plan to implement improvements as we go.
Hey, Lee, do you mind just speaking into the microphone?
It's dead. Oh. So what have we learned through this community involvement process? First of all, just to recap, we did hold 6 focus group meetings with various groups throughout the city. We did conduct 3 local community presentations, one with the Chamber, one with the Adult Community Center, and also with a joint meeting with the City Council and the County Board. We did also conduct an interview on Marshall News and Views. We held 2 pop-up meetings, and the purpose of this was to reach a broader audience than what we would typically have at an open house. We did have 2 community surveys that were issued, along with a website that's been up to date and newsletters. And then lastly, 4 public open houses, with this being our last one. So as far as our first survey goes, the purpose of that was to gather info from the public as far as what the critical issues were. And based on this information provided, we had just over 250 people respond. We took that information along with what we learned at our at our first open house, and the top 3 critical issues that were identified were future growth in Marshall and how that's going to change Highway 23, how things are going to change east of Highway 23. Secondly is driver behavior, and just having some confusion with some new improvements that have been made, as well as just continuing to educate drivers on how Highway 23 functions. And then lastly, crossing Highway 23 is challenging with the way that the roadway is designed today. The second survey was a follow-up where we asked the public to provide information as far as your concerns. And the top 3 concerns that were identified through this process, and we had almost 460 people respond, first and foremost was safety at the intersections. Second was access to, from, and across Highway 23. And then the last one was related to travel speeds, how fast or slow people drive through Marshall. We also solicited input on the priority locations of concern. So where is your first and foremost location of concern that you're worried about moving forward? Number 1 was County Road 7, followed by Lion Street and Clarice Avenue. Third was Highway 59. Fourth was Tiger and Commencement Boulevard over by the schools. And then last, in the top 5 was Highway 19. So what are the priorities for Highway 23? Well, using this information from the public input process, coupled with our technical analysis that we worked through as assessment team, we identified essentially priorities moving through the corridor here. The first one was essentially to look at making improvements at County Road 7 along with Lion Street and Clarice Avenue. While we're doing this, there are also other lower cost options that we can implement pretty readily that can be coupled with some of these other major improvements. And as with any project, we want to continue our ongoing public engagement activities to inform the public on what we're doing. Secondly, we would move on to looking at 4th Street and Tiger Drive. And what this would allow us to do is look at essentially reevaluating the corridor between these 2 intersections for a potential change in speed limit. Also with that, we'd be able to review what we looked at Highway 19 and Highway 59 and understand if some of the improvements that we implemented would help make changes. Then lastly, several of our lower priority locations. These locations essentially could be implemented. They could be either access closures, access restrictions, or other type of improvements. As time goes on, we understand that some of our higher priority improvements may benefit these other locations. So perhaps potentially needing to do something at these locations can be pushed down the road a ways. But nonetheless, they were looked at, and they are more of our lower priority locations. One thing we'd like to point out here is that based on the information from the public, based on the technical analysis, this is how the priorities were identified. But based on funding opportunities and how projects develop over time and how they can be implemented can change our priorities. And it could accelerate some projects. It could make some projects slide down the list. So with that, how we address these strategies, how we address these priorities, what improvements were looked at, and what is being recommended. So the first plan we take a look at was simply lowering the posted speed limit through Marshall between 4th Street and Tiger Drive. Next, we looked at essentially removing all the access points on Highway 23 and introducing interchanges. Now, this would require additional frontage road connections to connect all the roads that would be closed. The next plan was to essentially introduce intersection improvements to Highway 23, similar to what's at Saratoga Street now. Now, these improvements are effective at addressing the crash problems that we do see today along Highway 23. Then the next 4 plans intermixed roundabouts into the corridor. And essentially with roundabouts, we have the same effect as the J-turns like Saratoga, where we address our crash problem, but we also have the potential to lower speeds and how fast people drive through the corridor. So based on all the technical evaluation that we've done, comparing expected safety benefits, potential impacts to traffic, cost, incorporating public input, 2 corridor plans were identified with the study team as recommended to be moved forward to help pursue funding opportunities. The first one is our corridor plan E. More details on all this that we're presenting here is on the boards that we can talk about afterward. But essentially this corridor plan would be to implement a J-turn at County Road 7 as well as Lion Street, and then bookend our corridor with roundabouts to get the speeds down in between them. Our next plan is essentially just a minor variation of that plan where we change out the J-turn for a roundabout at County Road 7. Similar to the last plan, it will serve as a speed calming tool and address the crash problems that we're seeing today. But also at County Road 7, it would serve as a crossing for pedestrians and bicycles. So how did we get to these recommendations? So based on public input, we know that there are concerns with travel speeds along Highway 23. We know that there's concerns with safety at intersections, the access, how do we get to, from, and across Highway 23, and pedestrians and bicycles. And lastly, taking a look at costs. If we look at all these things together based on public input and technical analysis, what we have here is just a comparison chart. A lot of information on here, but essentially the red dots are where the plans don't meet the objectives of what we're trying to accomplish here. The yellow dots show that we are meeting the objectives, and then the green dots are indicating that we are meeting, or that they best meet the objectives. And so when comparing these alternatives, our corridor plan A, where we looked at lowering the posted speed through Marshall without doing any other improvements, is not going to get the benefit and safety improvement that we were considering, even though it's a low-cost option. The plan where we look at interchanges through Marshall, we know that that comes with a high cost as well as impact to businesses where these interchanges would go. It would also require additional frontage road systems and back road systems that really start to add up from a cost standpoint. So with that, we had the evaluation where we compared all the different plans where we just looked at intersection improvements, knowing that those are cost-effective improvements to address the problems that we're seeing. And again, after this presentation, we can have further discussion over by the boards to discuss this. So as we mentioned in our initial priority stage here, there are some other ongoing strategies that we can implement. Relatively low cost that don't require a long drawn out project development process. And these include installing additional signing or driver feedback signs to help with people and how fast they drive. We can install trees and landscaping along Highway 23, and this can serve as a speed calming measure to get people to slow down. And as any project evolves here, continued education on what we're proposing, as well as if these changes require us to change our priority down the road. We also took a look at our lower priority locations, as we've talked about, and really what these strategies are aimed at are restricting or eliminating access. They're looking at improving signal timing or phasing at the two traffic signals, taking a look at improving pedestrian and bicycle accommodations long-term, but also looking at other local roadway connections that can be introduced as development occurs to make sure that we're not adding access points to Highway 23. Now, a lot of these strategies were identified to help minimize the access and the conflict points on Highway 23. And even though some of our locations may not have a crash problem now, they're essentially designed the way some of our other intersections are that do have a crash problem. So we want to make sure that we are planning for the future in case problems do start to arise at these other locations. So where do we go from here? This assessment was essentially the first step in the overall project development and delivery process. And really with the completion of this assessment, our partners can go forward and start pursuing funding to implement these projects. Once funding is secured, we can move into the design process, which is where we actually prepare all of the materials and the plans and so forth that will be essentially used to build the project. And then lastly, we work into the construction side of things, where we actually build the project. And through this entire process, we're focused on keeping the public engaged and involved to get your feedback and educate you as we move through this process. As we mentioned, a lot of a lot of the other strategies that we talked about with the landscaping, the driver feedback signs, a lot of that can be implemented rather quickly. The challenge is with some of these other projects that we need to do to address our safety concerns, it's about a 2 to 5 year process to go through to get these implemented. So this concludes our presentation for the evening. Again, I want to thank you for your attendance today, but not only for today, but for throughout this process. We've had a lot of great feedback and information from the public that's really helped us along. All the materials that are presented here today, as well as a video of what is being presented, can be found online on our assessment website. And then we're looking forward to answering your questions here as we break up and go over and look at the boards. Thank you.